sell it for income. That puts you in another category. I buy and I hold and I use the cash flow, and cash flow is passive income, which is taxed less. So there's so many different reasons why a high financial IQ, part of your learning is to understand good debt and bad debt. If you're the old thinking, you might think all debt is bad. That is not correct. Today, you have to know good debt and bad debt. There's one more thing I think that's really important. You know, I said earlier that savers were losers. I believe, and I could be wrong, that in the near future, the debtors will be the winners. And the reason for that is, for example, I just bought an apartment house, and let's say I paid $20 million for it, and I have a $20 million mortgage on it. Well, if they keep devaluing the dollar, I'm going to be paying that $20 million off with dollars that are worth less and less and less. So people who have good debt become winners because after 1971, I can pay it back with junk dollars. Now, if you can understand that, you might understand why, to be a smart person in the 21st century, you need to know good debt versus bad debt. That takes a little education, a little reorientation. So it is unfortunate, because of 1971, when Nixon took us off the gold standard, savers became losers and debtors became winners, but debtors who have good debt. So the last thing I want to talk about debt is one of the best investments I made, because I started off with no money like most people. You know, my first investment was a little $18,000 condo in Hawaii, and I made a whopping $25 a month. I didn't make much money on that deal, but every time I did an investment, be it real estate or business, I got smarter, because experience makes you smarter. So I started with just a little $18,000 unit. I broke out my credit card. I paid the $2,000 down payment with my credit card, so it was 100% finance. Now, most experts will say you, that's stupid. You don't do that. But if you know what you're doing, you can do it. A number of years ago, I bought a $7 million commercial building. I paid for it with $0 down. And every month, after everything is paid for, it puts about $30,000 a month income in my pocket, or $360,000 a year for no money down. So that is the price of having a good education or a bad education. A good education is knowing the good debt versus bad debt and how debtors can win if you know what you're doing. Even in this economic environment of high volatility, because I'm basing all of my investments not on capital gains or appreciation, I base all of my investments on cash flow, how much money comes in. So even though the real estate market has crashed, I hate to say this, but it's been good for me, because more people became renters all of a sudden. So my rental rates went up, my income went up, I'm paying for it with cheap dollars and things like this. So in the new rules of money, you have to know the difference between good debt and bad debt, and why savers are losers and debtors are winners. Okay, and the old rule of money is invest for the long term, and most people say invest in mutual funds. I personally don't invest in mutual funds, and most people, it's not a bad idea. But if you want higher returns with less risk and less taxes, then you have to first invest in your financial intelligence. So mutual funds have its place for most people, but I personally don't invest in them, and I'll go into why. So when somebody says invest for the long term, one of the problems I have with that is, what does that mean? Because that's the old rule. The new rule is you have to know the difference between buy, sell, and fool. And so when I'm buying and selling something or investing, this is the difference for me, okay? When I buy, let's say, a house or an apartment house, I buy it long. That means I want to hold on to my real estate forever. But what I do is I sell it every 30 days to my renters. So I hold the property forever. All these guys who are flipping property, the problem with flipping property is that you have capital gains tax all the time. You're losing money to taxes. It doesn't make sense. So buying, let's say, an apartment house, I have, let's say, a 500-unit apartment house today, and I started off with little individual houses. You know, the rule for getting rich is from Monopoly: 4 green houses, 1 red hotel. 4 green houses, 1 red hotel. So I started with small houses, and today we have big apartment houses, big commercial buildings, things like this. But the principle is the same, whether it's a small house or a big house. So I buy it. I intend to hold it forever. I'm going to pass it on for generations, but I sell it every 30 days. The same with oil. The other day I was filling up my gas tank and I got really upset. It cost me $72 to fill my tank of gas. And the reason I was upset, because I was a buyer of gas. But then I went home that afternoon and I found oil hit approximately $140 a barrel. So then I was happy again. You see, on one side I was a buyer, which I was unhappy, but as a seller of oil, I was happy. So this is my point here. If you're going to be rich in life, the reason most people are poor is because they're primarily buyers with very little to sell. You know that old advice I talk about financial education: go to school and get a job. So let's say you sell your time, you know, sell it for $25 an hour. If that's all you've got to sell, you're not getting ahead, because the Federal Reserve keeps printing money faster and faster. You have to work harder and harder, and you get taxed harder. So if you're going to be rich, the thing my rich dad taught me was you have to have something to sell every single month. So every single month I'm selling my apartments, my units, for 30 days at a time. I'm selling my oil, you know, on the open market. And you look at what I did, even though I flunked out of high school twice because I couldn't write and I really couldn't spell, is when I write a book, I write it once, but I sell it into 100 different languages throughout the world. So every quarter I'm getting a paycheck. So to be rich, it really understands the new rules of money requires you to know when you're buying, when you're selling. And that is essential to being rich today. Now, when I talk about the fool, it's called the greater fool theory. So like being a real estate guy, I go out there and somebody says to me, oh, this house is $100,000, but next year it'll be worth $200,000. Generally, that's what's, you know, what do you call those guys? Real estate brokers or mortgage brokers or stock brokers. My rich dad said the reason they're called brokers is because they're broker than you are. So they're telling you to buy this stock or this house because the price will go up. Again, that's capital gains, not cash flow. And then you become the greater fool. You know, the people, unfortunately, who are hurting financially today in the housing market, they were the greater fool. They bought the idea that the price of real estate would keep going up. Well, as you and I all know, prices go up and prices go down. So if you're going to, the new rules of money and the financial intelligence and your financial education requires you to know, to be balanced, be both buyer and seller, and not be the greater fool. I say it again, when I fill up with gas, I get angry because I'm a buyer, but I'm happy because I'm also a seller. If you're going to be rich, you should be selling more than you're buying. One last thing is the one reason I really don't care much for mutual funds is because I don't know if you're the buyer, the seller, or the fool, but I'll make that decision. If you're the investor, then you put up 100% of the money, and I think you take 100% of the risk. It doesn't make sense to me. Same as you put money in the bank. And the mutual fund company, they put up 0% of the money, but what they get is 80% of the returns. So this is why I really don't recommend, you know, but it's good for most people. Put your money in a mutual fund and just let it sit there. But what happens is you take 100% of the risk, you only get 20% of the returns, and you put up 100% of the money. That doesn't make sense to me. That's why I like to use debt, good debt as leverage and things like this. But again, this is your greatest asset right here. So I don't just blindly invest for the long term. I don't park my money. And the reason I don't park my money in the bank is because I said in 1971, the U.S. dollar stopped being money and it became a currency. The word currency means current. You must keep your money moving. The people who are losing financially today are people who are parking their money in long-term things like savings account and mutual funds. That's good for the average person. It's good for the average investor. And it's better than nothing. It's better than being poor. but you're not getting ahead with old information or old rules of money. I'll just pass this last thing along for those of you who say, well, I don't want to be an investor, it's too much work. I understand. It was years ago, a friend of mine, a friend asked a friend of mine, says, what would you say to the average investor? And my friend, who's a very rich man, said, what I say to the average investor is, don't be average. Because today, in this high volatile environment, the average people, the middle class, are getting wiped out. So, those are the new rules of money. You don't invest for the long term. You have to know when to buy, when to sell, and when not to be a fool. And so the last old rule of money is always that interesting word is called diversify. If you listen to most guys, they go, diversify, diversify, diversify. Diversify, diversify, diversify. And then people say, well, diversify, diversify, diversify. But the richest investor in the world, a man named Warren Buffett, does not diversify. So my question is, if the richest investor in the world, Warren Buffett, doesn't diversify, why is everybody else recommending you diversify? And in my term, my rich dad said, diversify means de-worsify. And what they want you to do is buy a lot of stuff, because most brokers, and again, the reason they're brokers is because they're broke, is that they can't tell you which is going to be the good stock or the good real estate or the good bond and all this. So they tell you to diversify. That's like me going to a horse race and not knowing which horse is going to win, so I'm going to bet on every single horse. That's diversifying your bet. The only way a diversification process works is if the dark horse wins. Now, that doesn't happen very often, but that's not a very good way. But the common wisdom, the old intelligence idea is to diversify, and what I believe in is something else, is increase your financial IQ, your financial intelligence, and instead focus. And what focus stands for is this. Focus is follow one course till you're successful. And so that's what I did in 1973. I signed up for my first real estate investment course. And I just did it and did it and did it. You know, I bought this one little $18,000 place. And I did it again, and I did it again, and I did it again until the point where I understood it. And then I went into becoming an entrepreneur. And I did it, and I did it, and did it. And I'm still learning. And I'm still learning about real estate. And the reason, in 1966, I got into oil when I went to work for the Standard Oil Company. So today, I'm still focusing. I invest in oil and oil and oil, and I don't diversify. You know, it doesn't mean I don't lose. Sometimes I lose, sometimes I make mistakes and all this. But I just don't buy good as with all the bad. If you're going to be successful as an investor, you know, diversification is good for the average investor. If that's what you want to be, have a good life. But what I'd rather do is be able to know the good ones from the bad ones, the good investments from the bad investments, the good advisors from the bad advisors, and what's good for me and what's not good for you. Because what I do is not necessarily what's going to work for you, and vice versa here. So that's why I really think instead of diversification or diversifying, the new rules of money say follow one course until you're successful, and then keep doing it. Because once you find that way of being successful, you can do it again and again and again. It's just like learning to walk. You fall down a number of times, but once you learn to walk, you know it forever. And that's what I recommend. So some of the difference between the old rules and the new rules. Thank you very much.